Well, hello. Welcome to the Creative Writing Life podcast, where we talk with writers from all mediums and genres about themselves, their work, and advice they have for writers. I'm your host, Paul Zeidman, and my guest today is Alexandra Salmon. She is a fiction writer and the author of the novel Can't Turn Back, as well as an independent audio producer and the host of Main Character, the podcast. Alexandra Salmon, welcome to the Creative Writing Life podcast.
Oh, thank you for having me, Paul.
Oh, my pleasure. Well, and as regular listeners and viewers of the show are familiar, we like to start things off talking about anything we may have read or watched lately. Did we like it? Did we hate it? Were we kind of like, I don't ever see it, never need to see that again? I'll go first just to give you some time to collect your thoughts. My local movie house had a screening of probably one of my absolute favorite Hitchcock movies, was North by Northwest. I can never get tired of seeing that. And just to see it on the big screen was just an added bonus. Loved it. A couple of scenes that I'd totally forgotten about. And once again, I don't know, maybe it's me that there was this couple on the other side of the theater just would not stop talking. Oh, it was
Oh,
driving me
no.
crazy. And I'm sure a few other people, so many people going, shh, stop talking. And I don't think they got the point until about, I don't know, a third of the way into the movie. And then they just were quiet. So, it's times like that, or too bad stun guns aren't allowed in movie theaters, but I digress. Alexandra, what about you? Anything interesting or not so interesting on the viewing or reading fronts?
So I haven't seen the It Ends With Us movie. I've heard all kinds of things and how like Blake Lively's basically being canceled over it. But I had read the book and I
Hmm.
kind of like reread it just after that all came out, just to see if my thoughts about it were the same, and they are. I'm not like it's entertaining. It's if you want to knock it out in one day at the beach, it's totally that book. Um, but I have some thoughts on it that I had kind of done like a book review on it.
Hmm.
Basically, I guess the trope is, I don't know if you're familiar with the story,
Not
but
real.
it's
I kind of. I think I heard more about Blake Lively and her
yeah.
co-star. I'm not sure if he was the director as well. I mean, I haven't seen it, so I've only
Right.
heard
Well, I guess
snippets.
yeah, I guess he directed it and produced it, and he had bought the rights to this book before COVID, and then somehow Blake Lively and Ryan Reynolds became attached to it, and they had sort of differing visions.
Mm.
So that's all playing out, and then all this footage of Blake Lively, just I guess being rude to people, is kind of come out now.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, because it's well, the plot of the book is it's set in Boston actually, and this guy and this girl get together. He's described as this like super handsome, very desirable neurosurgeon, and oh, it's my dog, sorry.
That's okay.
Um,
That's okay. We all have pets.
yeah, and she's described as just kind of like very average. And my issue with it, I guess, is that I don't know what he sees in her. And what I had said in the video that I made about it is that there's a like in Twilight, that's kind of the premise of the book, but at least in Twilight, it's like when you hear other people talk about Bella, they kind of see her differently than she sees herself.
Hmm.
So you kind of think maybe she's got more going for her than she thinks she does, and that's why Edward would like her.
Sure.
With this, there's nothing that anybody else around this girl kind of says to make me think that in her own mind she's average, but in reality, uh, she's got something that she doesn't see in herself. And then so this guy is just like very into her, and then when they get together, she just gets all this irrational confidence. And I'm like, I don't know where that came from. Because there's nothing, like there's nothing you find out about it that would support that, I guess. So
Hmm.
that was my issue with it, because to me, that makes it not as believable. And then
Okay.
some people kind of responded to it and said, well, that's why he kind of was able to suck her in, because what ends up happening is that he becomes domestically violent.
Mm.
And that's also where like the Blake Lively controversy came in, because I guess the director wanted to make it more of a domestic violence focus and awareness. And I don't know if this is accurate, but the criticism she's getting, I guess, is that people felt she was a little insensitive to it and just thought it was like a silly little rom-com.
Oh.
And then
Yeah.
yeah, like that's
Okay.
why they found all this stuff of her like being, I guess, kind of rude to people, and we're like, see, she's a rude person.
Okay.
I
Okay.
mean,
So
I don't
not
know.
okay. So not about the movie. So, but would you recommend the book?
It depends. I
Okay.
think if you don't want to like work very hard to read something and you're kind of into smut, then yeah, you'll probably like it.
Okay. Well, I,
And
I almost said it's a light beach read, but if you want to add smut to the description, sure. Whatever works for people.
well, yeah, I think that's like
Hmm.
that's why it's taken off.
Okay. Got it.
So,
Okay.
I mean, look, if you're into that, then yeah, this probably checks all the boxes. If that's not what you're into and then you've just heard it's a popular book,
Hmm.
you might be disappointed for those reasons.
Okay, interesting stuff. Okay, well, Alexandra Salmon, let's talk a little bit about you, Alexandra Salmon, the writer. So, were you always a writer as a kid, or were you just kind
Yes.
of? And well, that was fast. So, like, what kind of stuff did you like to write when you were younger?
Oh, well, going back really young, um, I mean, when you're little, you just have such a vivid imagination. So it was probably things that didn't really make a lot of sense. But there
Hmm.
were things obviously borrowed from real life. The first book I ever like, the first story I ever finished, start to finish, and wrote it down, and I think my family probably still has it. It was about my grandmother. It's called Ruthie Goes Shopping. She really likes to shop.
Okay.
So, uh, yeah, I always loved to read, and ever since I really could write, I would always just write down little stories.
Okay. Were there any particular favorite authors that like, oh my gosh, this author has a new book out. I have to go to the store and get it. I have to get it at the library. And like, what do you mean there's no more until next week?
Yeah, I mean, growing up, I would say like, being like in elementary school, I kind of discovered like the classics, like Beverly Cleary, Judy Blume.
Hmm.
So those were older, but they were new to me, obviously. Sorry.
Sure. That's okay. It's a hot day.
Yeah. Um, so yeah, there weren't like, they weren't coming out with new stuff, but it didn't matter because I
Hmm.
was just discovering all of it for the first time. When I was for my 12th birthday, I think it was, the first two Harry Potter books were already out. And this was like the third one was gonna come out later that fall, and there was like a little bit of a buzz about it. It was like kind of just starting to catch on.
Hmm.
So that I got caught up in that the way everybody else did. I loved those books. So that was for me, that was it. I was a little older because this was a few years later, but it was like they were coming out with new ones all the time. The Gossip Girl book series.
Hmm.
Yeah, I just found that like forever entertaining.
Okay. So all right. So let's move on to how you came up or let's talk a little bit about your book, Can't Turn Back. That it's actually, I'm going to let you do the description of it. So, here's here's your elevator pitch moment for okay, like, hey everybody, here's this book, Can't Turn Back. It's by Alexandra Salmon, and here's the author herself to tell you what it's about.
Sure. So it's about this family from Massachusetts that has to go into the witness protection program. The father is an architect, and he got kind of coerced into working with the local mob, and he would get these government contracts and have to give them a kickback. He tried to get out of it, but they threatened him. He ended up making a lot of money. The IRS was wondering why he had so much money. So he ratted out everybody. But when you do that, you can't just, live free. This was in exchange for immunity. So he and his family had to go to the witness protection program. And the kids are a little older at this point, so they don't have to go, but I mean they have to go. So they move to the middle of nowhere in northern Michigan and they try and start over, but it's one of those things where it's like your past doesn't stay buried.
Sure,
Even though
sure.
they're with new people, they're still the same people.
Hmm. Yeah, and well, I have so many questions about it because I read it last week, and it's much different than what I was expecting. So the first question is like, what
What
was
were
the
you expecting?
well, we'll get into that eventually. But what was
Okay.
the inspiration for the story? Did you just think, what would it be like, if all of a sudden we had to, you pull up stakes and just vamoose to like the middle of nowhere?
A little bit. So it was when I was 21, I think it was, I was an intern for a PR firm. And it was like, I don't know, they did like PR for medical device companies. It wasn't like very, I don't know. I don't
Not the
think
most glamorous job.
yeah, not glamorous. But that summer there had been some sort of data breach with Verizon, and information for people who are in the witness protection program was compromised. So it was kind of like, working in PR, it was like people were talking about it in the office. Like, imagine representing Verizon right now. This is a disaster.
Hmm.
And my mom and I, we were talking about what it would be like to go into witness protection, and that, you couldn't communicate with anybody you knew. And she said, somebody would just have to come pick you up in the middle of the night. And that was kind of the inspiration for it. I was like, that would be a great book. So I took it and I ran with it.
Oh, yes. Yeah, yeah, you certainly did. So I was going to say, like, we've all seen, this kind of thing in TV and movies, like if somebody
Yeah.
has to go into witness relocation. So how much research did you do to, like, about the actual program, and how much of that were you able to incorporate into the story?
Quite a bit. So the guy who started the witness protection program, actually, he wrote a book all about how he started it, why he started it, kind of their protocols in the beginning, how they've adapted it over the years. So that was really the I guess you would say it was sort of my like guidelines for how I had them go about it. All of
Hmm.
that came from the book. So maybe they've changed it over the years, but it it was real.
Yeah, because what I thought was really interesting is that there's a scene where the family meets with someone from the program. He explains everything that's going to happen, and it's a relatively fast scene that you're not mincing words. You're just putting it all out on the table for this family, and then all of a sudden that they have, I don't know, a really short window to pack up what they can take or what they want to take, and everything else to be taken care of. And I was just thinking, it never really occurred to me that if someone says, okay, I have to go into witness relocation, what the process is or what's involved. That because
Right,
you always think about it from their perspective, like how is this going to change my life? But it's all of that surrounding I don't know, material, that surrounding activity, like, who packs up their house? What else do they do? I mean,
right.
so was this part of the research, or were you able to get, I mean, even I don't want eyewitness accounts, like, someone who was
Right.
in the program, of course, under anonymous sources, like, were they able to describe, this is what happened to me and my family?
Yeah. I mean, they do it under fake names, obviously,
Sure,
but
sure.
yes.
Okay. I also wanted to ask, so the family is relocates to this small town in like northern Michigan.
Florida, Michigan, yeah.
And so I mean, so did you have to do research on small towns, or did you just kind of like pick a map and just like, point and say, okay, right there?
I got very lucky because I had a group of friends. I had studied abroad with one of them, and then I met this whole other group of people, and they lived in northern Michigan in a very small town. And when I visited it, I said, this is where they have to be because nobody would find them.
Did you have to like really, were you trying to be accurate with the describing the town, or we just kind of like, okay, here's this town, I'm just gonna, make it up as I go?
Um, you know, again, I'd visited it, so I knew what it was like. It is
Hmm.
small, so there's not a lot to it. And then the Cadillac, which is next to Manton, that's kind of where it's like that's where Walmart is, like that type of
Sure.
stuff. Um, I mean, I wanted to like, because I'm not from there, so I
Hmm.
wanted to like do it right. I didn't want the people who grew up there to hate me. Um, but then when they kind of rebuild it, I
Hmm.
guess, like my my friend Eric, he was like, "Sounds like a fabulous mansion. Like I wish that was the one I lived in."
Yeah. So I mean, did you take any creative license with the town, or just kind of like use it as a basis and tried to keep it, semi-realistic or semi-accurate?
I tried to keep it as accurate as possible.
Hmm.
I hope I did.
Yeah, I was going to say, has there been reactions from the townsfolk about, or at least your friend, who I guess who's
Yeah.
from there?
Yeah, they seem to appreciate that I included it.
Hmm. Okay. I initially thought, as I was reading that, it was going to be this one character, Claire, who then becomes
Mhm.
Charlotte. I thought she was going to
Yeah.
be the main character, but as things develop and we shift the focus, shift the focus after the move, that it really becomes a little wider. In I don't know a wider view of the family, that we
Yeah.
start seeing a lot more about her younger brother and a bit about the dad. The mom, I was surprised that it wasn't as much about her. But I mean, was it your intent when you started? Okay, I want to have it to be about this family. but did you start out thinking it's going to be Claire's story and then decide, oh my gosh, there's so much other stuff going on with the family that I can do more about them, and also which will expand the story? Or did it just kind of like, was it develop as you were working, like, oh yeah, there's Claire, but oh, what about the brother, and what about the dad, and like what was the process for developing the story?
Yeah, I think it really did develop as I went on
Hmm.
because um I think they kind of threw themselves into their new lives a little more than she did. She was kind of like didn't really want to be there, was a little bit more reluctant to it until things started happening that she was happy with and enjoyed and wanted to be a part of.
Hmm. Well, I also noticed that there's also a middle sister
Yeah.
who is wants nothing to do with. I'm not doing any spoilers.
Right.
She wants nothing to do with it. So she
Yeah.
goes off to somewhere else, but occasionally keeps in touch and comes to visit. So was that also a part of the initial plan? You thought, okay, there has to be
Yeah.
someone who does not want to go along with it. And what was it like to develop her story? Did you have to like decide, okay, how semi-detached is she going to be?
Well, she was already detached, so that felt like it already fit. But
Hmm.
I liked that she kind of had a fresh start and she was able to make the most of it. I liked that for her.
Hmm. So, were you, as you were developing the story, did you realize, okay, there's so much more to like the brothers' storyline, then they're also about the dad. What was the process for developing those storylines? Did you just like, okay, I'm just gonna start here and like see what happens, or do you have like an end point and we're able to work towards it?
Um, well, I knew they were gonna get shaken up in some way and then nothing would be the same.
Okay.
Yeah. And
Okay.
then I mean not to like give away too much, but yeah, I mean I knew Charlotte would be able to deal with it the best because her life was probably the least affected.
Hmm. Okay.
Yeah.
So again, so like how much outlining did you do? Did you just kind of like, okay, I'm going to start here, see what happens, or did you kind of like, okay, here's how Charlotte's story is going to develop?
Um, I think it was a little bit of both. Because I think when you outline a story or you have, well, I don't, for me personally, I think you get ideas that could be good stories all the time, but if they
Hmm.
don't go anywhere, you're not going to pursue them.
Sure, sure.
And uh this one, I think, I had different endings in mind, but I think anytime you start to like, so you begin with some sort of direction, and then I think once you get going, these things kind of they develop organically, and it's
Hmm.
things you didn't even think of once you just start like make you start writing and then you start making those connections.
Hmm. Because that sounds very familiar to what a lot of other writers have told me, is that while they're working on their stories, that they have an idea of how they want this story to go, but then the characters almost take over and
Yeah.
dictate, okay, you know what, this is what you wanted me to do, but this is what I think I should actually be doing. It's more in
Yeah.
character with the kind of character that I am. Now, did that ever happen with any of these characters, or was it kind of like someone just was too rebellious a character for you to keep under control?
It's interesting because like the middle sister, I guess because she's the middle child, was the
Hmm.
more rebellious one, but then when they went away, she started to be kind of the voice of reason.
Hmm.
And then the brother, when his life got off track, he was the hardest one to control. Nobody could do it.
I was going to say how not out there, but like how extreme were you willing to go, especially with his storyline? Because he goes through some serious stuff, and
Yeah,
it is totally unexpected from like how his story starts out, and
I know.
all of a sudden this he he will willingly goes into all this really bad stuff.
Yeah. Um, I knew I wanted to get him out of it.
Hmm.
Which is interesting because I'm working on another story right now where again, like the main character not unwillingly gets into some really bad things. She thinks that things are one way only to find out it's totally different, and I don't know if I want to bring her out of it or not. Oh, well, not
Oh,
that I don't want to. I don't know if she should. I don't know if the story should go that way yet.
Okay, so I also wanted to ask you, so were there any, while you were putting it all together, were there
Yeah.
any storylines or, suddenly plot developments that you decided, you know what, this is just not working. I can't figure a way out of this, or this just seems wrong, that you had to go back and, okay, I'm just gonna, start over from scratch, and like that, this is a good jumping off point, or did you already have it all pretty mapped out as you were going along?
It started out where the main character died. That was the original ending.
Wow, that is different.
Yeah. And that was just gonna blow everybody's lives up. But then I don't know. I didn't like that, and I
Hmm.
totally redid it because it had like a different title, a different cover, different everything. But I knew
Sure.
somebody had to die.
Okay. And so what was the kind of like, this isn't working, or I don't like this. What was kind of like the trigger for you to say, okay, this isn't working, back to square one.
I just didn't think it was very good.
Okay. That's okay. Were you also, as you were writing it, that you maybe had something that you had planned was going to happen, then you decided just on a whim, like, hey, what if this suddenly totally opposite thing happened, and that you were able to, and maybe that like triggered just kind of like, oh my God, this is brilliant. I mean, I have to keep going with this and see where it takes me. Or was it just kind of like, this is what I want, this is where I'm going to go, everything is set?
It was more of the latter, I think,
Hmm.
especially because it took me so long to write it. So part of me just want to be done and move on.
Oh, I was going to ask you, how long did it take you to put it all together?
It took about 8 years,
Wow.
which
Okay.
is like that's not typical for a writer, and it's not like I don't want people to think that it takes 8 years to write a book because it totally does not.
Hmm.
It was I mean, I don't know. There was a lot going on with me. Um, I think writing is like anything else. It's about consistency. You just have to put in a certain number of words a day, and not
Hmm.
all of them are good. But if you keep at it, it adds up, and then you can always add or remove. And that was not my approach for a long time for a variety of reasons.
Hmm.
Uh,
Well, actually, I wanted to say, like, as you said, it took you 8 years, but it also sounds like the story went through so many changes, especially if one character, your main character dies, and you change that, then yeah, it
well,
sounds
that
like
actually came later.
that came later. Okay.
Yeah, no, it took 8 years to even finish the first version. And again, it was just because I wasn't consistent. I think some people think they'll just write when they get inspired.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and that doesn't really work.
So once you kind of, I guess, found that groove, were you able to have a more consistent writing schedule? Kind of like, okay,
Yes.
I'm going to write, like, I've got from 7 to 8 tonight. That's when I'm going to sit down and write. If I go longer, great. If I can just squeeze out a half a page, or, a page or two in that time, that's perfect too.
Yeah, once I like, because again, I think my lack of discipline with it, eh, there were a lot of factors. I think it was like my lifestyle just being like young 20s and prioritizing other things. But
Hmm.
mostly I think it was because I had been this girl who writes for so long. And there wasn't a whole lot that I was doing other than that I was doing well, or certainly not as well as writing. So there was this fear that if I put this book out there and nobody liked it, that I was just, like, my whole identity was wrapped up in being a writer. So if the book was a failure, then I was a failure. So there were always reasons to like put it off.
Hmm.
It's like life can always get in the way. But then once I kind of got over that and realized that writing is just something I do and I enjoy, and it's not my identity or the end all be all, then I was like, okay, I'm gonna write 1,000 words a day, and to finish it took 6 months.
Wow, that's great. And I think I saw it, I think on your website, that it was something maybe like because of lockdown that you're able to go
Yeah,
back, like that's what was
redo
really
it.
like,
Yeah,
that was like the real, that was, set you off like, okay, now I can really get this thing done.
and that took probably about 6 weeks because I only did 10,000 words to change the plot lines.
Hmm.
So
And
yeah, that because at this point I knew what to do and I knew exactly what I was doing, and I had the time.
well, yeah, there was that. Okay,
So
so
yeah,
this, okay. So how was the process of, because this is a self-published book.
yes.
And so what was the process like that for you? Because I tried to do it myself and it was a disaster. I was so fortunate. I had a friend who was an editor who was
Oh
able to
God,
come in,
yeah.
who was able to come in and say, okay, I can take care of this, all this other stuff. This is what I need from you. And it was a godsend for me.
Yeah, no, so I had friends who edited it, which was great. I mean, I think this time around I would hire a real editor, but I had no money. Um,
Sure.
and yeah, no, a lot of like YouTube videos as to how to get the formatting exactly right. Cause yeah, Amazon is not forgiving.
That's one of them. Yeah, I'll say that. I was going to say, so what was the response from beta readers that okay, you had your friends help you put the whole thing together, and I'm sure you sent it out. Okay, I need your feedback on this. Did that make a big impact, like on a rewrite or a second or third draft?
Yeah, my dad was the one who was like, it could this I think it's good, it could be great. Here's what I think you need to change. When he told me, I was like, I think you're right.
Mm. Were there any kind of like, oh, you have no idea what you're talking about? That character would never
No.
do that.
No, I value his opinion because he's a smart guy and he reads a lot. So and also I think part of me knew that it wasn't as like it wasn't the best I could do.
Hmm.
I think part of me just wanted to get it out there because I wanted to move on in a way, and also because um that was the only dream I ever had with my life. So there was a part of me that would think, I don't know, what if I got in a car accident, my life ended tomorrow, and then it was
Hmm.
like, I don't want to say all for nothing, but kind of.
Sure, sure. I
Like
can.
at least I had that. Like I was
Right, right.
shocked.
Okay, so apart from the people of Minton, Michigan or Manton, Michigan,
Yeah.
so how has the response been to the book? I mean, have you passed it around to like anybody in publishing, or is anyone just kind of like, hey, the friend you sent it to said, hey, I read it, loved it. What's next?
Yeah, I mean, like the people close to me all like it, but like what are they gonna say? Yeah, I mean, people seem to like it. There are some people who don't like it. Some girl on Goodreads gave it 1 star, but you know what? I appreciate her because she bought it and read it. And like my best friend, I bet she's not read it. Like she's not a reader,
Hmm.
and I gave it to her. So like those are two things that not everybody does.
Yeah, yeah, it is what a writer has to go through. So you mentioned your next project. So can you at least give a little tease about that? Like, what is
Yeah.
it? Similar genre, or is it something totally different?
I guess similar but different. So it's about, I mean, I live in Massachusetts. I grew up here, so I guess it's kind of a familiar setting for these. It's a couple. They live in the city in Massachusetts. It's like, they have one kid. They're kind of thinking about having another. Um, they're kind of starting to like outgrow their space, but they like where they are. And then they find out that they're like unexpectedly pregnant, and they get this like once in a lifetime opportunity to buy a home from an estate in a town, like a ritzy town outside of the city that they normally would never be able to afford. And they move in like during the shelter in place days, and everybody is very nice, but there's something that's like a little off, and I'm not going to reveal what it is yet, but it's everything's not what it seems.
What genre wasn't that raises so many questions. So what genre would you now say it is? I mean, is it
I guess
can
horror.
you at least hint at it? I mean, is it thriller? Is it, ghost
Yeah,
story? Does it involve the
no
undead?
ghosts. Um, they're probably trying to conjure them. Uh, yeah, I guess thriller and horror.
Okay, well, that's great. That's great. And are you a big fan of that? Because it's always fun to write stuff that you really enjoy writing, because then the writing doesn't seem as much like work. It's kind of like, hey, I'm having fun writing
Yeah.
this crazy scary story.
It's interesting because if I'm gonna read something, probably not, honestly. Although I have read all the like, the classics, I guess. Um, or if I'm gonna watch a movie, like people love scary movies.
Hmm.
Like it's fall, we're coming up to Halloween. I'm like, I don't like it doesn't make me entertained to feel scared and just like have a bunch of adrenaline for no reason.
Sure, sure.
But yeah, when I write it, it's interesting because I feel like the main character, it's from a woman's point of view, and I relate to her and I like her, but at the same time, this isn't somebody who's like me. And I feel emotionally a little bit detached. And I think probably it's just because of what I know they're about to be put through.
Okay, that actually raises a great question. How is it writing a character who is very unlike you as a person? Are you like, do you find yourself thinking, okay, this is how I would do it, but this is totally how she would do it? Is that a
Yeah.
challenge for you, or is it kind of like, actually, this
Oh,
isn't as bad as I thought?
No, it's not at all because I never think of how I would do it because it's, I don't know. Like, in a sense, I think when you write a story, all of them kind of are you, but at the same time, this is very much not like me. So again, I think that's where the detachment comes in.
Hmm.
Because it's like, I don't know, all like pretty much every single choice she's made to even get to where she is now, it's like the opposite of what I would do.
Yeah, the reason I ask is because of my thing is screenwriting, and like every character in some capacity is like one aspect of your personality.
Yes.
And so I was going to ask if like so if this main character in your new one, she's the opposite of you, but does she share any similar traits? But also wanted to kind of piggyback on that. So going back to Can't Turn Back, are the members of the family do any of them kind of like have one aspect of Alexandra's personality?
I think they all do. I think that was very like because it was my first one. Yeah, I think I ended up being very like attached to all of them.
Hmm. Did that make you a little more protective of them, or it's just kind of like
Mm.
you're just kind of like I'm gonna put you through the ringer?
Yeah, maybe a little bit.
Okay.
Like I
Uh,
knew I had to, but yeah, that's probably why I didn't want to like go too far with them.
Sure, sure. Uh, I'm gonna actually we're gonna sidetrack for a second. That I
Yeah.
alluded to this at the beginning of the show. That you are also a podcaster, and I'm guessing that
Yeah.
your podcast is called Main Character, and
Well,
it's I'm
actually
gonna
not anymore.
not anymore. Okay, it's a
Okay.
new name.
Yeah, well no, so it's main character I was doing it was kind of about writing.
Hmm.
I don't know. So I ended up I became a part of a YouTube show
Hmm.
here in Boston, Massachusetts. I live in it's a neighborhood, it's called the North End. It's like the Little Italy of Boston.
Okay.
And I had met the producer of the show. He produced or he had been the producer of a local news show called Chronicle. It's very popular in Boston for over 40 years. And this is his like retirement project, which I bet he wishes he never started because now he's busier than ever. Um, and the two hosts are two of my neighbors, and they're these guys and they're a bit older. So when he met me and he knew that I had a podcast, he was like, I'd love to have you on the show because I'd love to get younger people to watch and I'd love to get women to watch it. So I did. And I did a couple episodes and then I said, what if I made this show like the show like a YouTube, like well, because it's a YouTube show,
Okay.
excuse me, like a social media presence, because all they had was YouTube.
Hmm.
They really wanted to get to 1,000 subscribers. I think they had like 500 at this point. And I said, what if we promoted it a little on social media? And they were like, yeah, sure, go ahead. Like, we don't know anything about that. So I did. And this thing took off.
That's great.
Yeah, it has like almost 25,000 followers by now, I think.
Wow, that is
Yeah.
taking off.
So I was like, I think we have something here. I think more people are interested in this than main characters. So I came to them and I said, I would like to turn my podcast into like my North End, the podcast, and have it be only stories from the North End and just interview people in this neighborhood. Because there's a lot of people who have been here for several generations.
Sure.
And, they don't just live here, but they also have local businesses here. And I just thought these were really interesting stories that, like in the YouTube videos, they're not as long. So I wanted to have kind of a longer format to share those stories. So I just shot the first 4 episodes on Monday, and I'll be releasing that in mid-October.
What are some of the topics? Because is it just really specifically about that neighborhood?
Yeah, so it's called My North End, the podcast, and it's all just about like living and growing up in the North End. So I had on our local priest because he's very beloved and he's just very good to our community and he's very much like he walks the walk.
Hmm.
And so he was on and he grew up here too. So it's very interesting that he kind of like this is his flock, but it's also where he was born and raised. And when he does like the funeral mass, it's not just somebody who like comes to church every now and then. It's somebody that he like knows and has been a part of his day-to-day life. I think that's very unique. And
Hmm.
then I had on two other guests, and one of them is a girl who also, was born and raised here, and she's like 22 or 23. And then my other guest, same thing, but he's 80. So it's the same neighborhood, but these are two like drastically different stories.
Yeah. Wow. So it sounds just like a lot of local color, just kind of
Yeah.
like, and maybe like
Oh,
here's
they've got
something
that.
like here's something about our neighborhood you might not have known, or here's that guy
Yeah.
you see him every day, but here's the here's the story behind him.
Right.
Oh, that sounds great. And so, so how long had the YouTube thing been going on before you entered the picture?
Um, I think they had like 8 or 9 episodes. So probably like I don't know. I think it had like this was ended 2023. I think it had started earlier that year.
Hmm. And so now it's because of your involvement, and it sounds like just really spreading word on social media, it's just really just exploded, as you said.
Yeah, I mean, I like all I did was post these things. Like Gino, the producer, I mean, he knows what he's doing, obviously, and I think just because the videos are like high quality, it's not just like on somebody's phone.
Sure.
And it's I think it's just like he did a very good job of capturing the soul of the neighborhood. And there was a time when the North End was like the most populated square mile in America. So even though it's not like that anymore, there's still a lot of people who have ties to the neighborhood and are interested in it.
Okay, and I'm sorry, what's the name of the podcast again?
Sure, it's called My North End, the podcast.
My North End of the podcast.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Well, Alexandra, I'd like to wrap things up. I always ask our guest, like, what advice do you have for writers? I mean, everybody has had a unique experience putting their book or project together. Like, what are some of the things that you learned that you are think are really valuable for other writers to keep in mind?
Yeah, I mean, my process is always evolving.
Hmm.
So I'm not like a advice person because I'm also always like adapting and changing my mind. But I would say it's just consistency. Like just keep writing, even if you're not in a good mood,
that that is a
you're tired
challenge.
or
That I was
whatever.
going to say
Yeah.
that's a challenge for any writer, honestly. Okay, well,
Well,
that's
you know
good.
what? I got is like very good advice when I was like 15. I had been like for a school project reading The Pact. And this is like the internet was kind of like the wild, wild west. So somehow like Jodi Picoult's like website had her email address on it. So I emailed her and I said, Jodi, I'm an aspiring writer. I'm like in high school. I said, what do you do about writer's block? And God bless her, she replied like immediately too. And she said, Alexandra, I don't have time for writer's block. She goes, she's because at the time she had 3 young kids. And she's like, I just like at a certain time of day, I just sit down. She said, I put my butt in the chair. That's what she said. And she goes, I just write. Maybe it's my grocery list. It
Mhm.
doesn't matter. But like, if you keep going, essentially, like, she doesn't think it's real and is basically just an excuse. And I think at the time I was like, that's a little harsh. But now I realize that she was right. So I guess I would just pass that along. I can't really take credit for it, but I've put it into practice and it's the most um I would say that's the one piece of advice that I got that rang the most true for me and it has still applied all these years.
Yeah, I was going to say that sounds very similar to advice I've gotten from several other writers. It's ask and share. This thing ain't going to write itself, so you got to do that. And
Well,
I
she's an
do.
absolute machine. Like, go to any airport in America and just like look.
Yeah, yeah. And also, I want to add this that this like several years ago, many many years ago, I went to a screenwriting conference in L.A. and Shane Black was one of the featured speakers, and he had Lethal Weapon and Kiss Kiss Bang Bang. He's a brilliant writer.
Yeah.
And the Nice Guys, love the Nice Guys. That someone had said like, what advice would you have for aspiring screenwriters? He said, I'm going to stop you right there. Don't call yourself an aspiring writer because an aspiring writer is somebody who wants to write. If you
Yeah.
sit down and you actually are writing, yes, you can call yourself a writer. Yeah, you might not be getting paid for it, but you are still a writer, and that's more than some people are actually willing to do. So the fact that you are able to sit down and crank something out, it may be really lousy, and you may have to scrap all of it, but you should still consider yourself a writer.
Yeah. No, absolutely. 100%.
Okay. Alexandra Salmon, this has been fantastic. I will say, let's see. The book, again, is Can't
Well,
Turn
thank you.
Back, available on Amazon. And her website is alexandraj7.com. You can get all of the information and contact. Are you going to have links to the North End podcast there?
Yes. Once they're available, yes.
Okay. And are they also available, I guess, on major podcast platforms as
Anywhere
well?
you get podcasts, they'll be there. And then you can watch them on YouTube too.
Okay, that is fantastic. Alexandra, thank you so much for being here today. This was wonderful.
Oh, thank you, Paul. Thank you for having me.
Oh, my pleasure. Okay, audience, if you enjoyed today's show, please hit like and subscribe. You can leave a comment. You can tell your friends. We'd appreciate it. You can also check out my screenwriting blog, Maximum Z. That's at maximumz.blog. Follow me on Twitter at maximum_Z. And you can also follow the Twitter account for this show at podcast CWL. I'm on Instagram at Pez Screenwriting. And you can check out my Go Ahead and Ask books on Amazon, the ones about screenwriting and pie. Like I said, that's Alexandra. I'm Paul. This has been the Creative Writing Life podcast. Thanks for listening. Stay safe, stay healthy. Most importantly, go write something.